Hello, and welcome to a sunny book nook. Today I'm going to be doing my July wrap-up. Sorry this is a little late, but that's pretty usual for this channel, so get used to it if you're going to stick around, which you should. Subscribe if you haven't already, etc. Anyways, today I'm going to be talking about the 17 books that I read in the month of July, and usually I go through the different books that I read from beginning of the month to the end in terms of when I read them, but I was thinking about this and it would probably make more sense for me to talk about it from most recently read to oldest read, because the more recent reads are fresher in my mind and, obviously more recent reads. So I think that's what I'm going to be doing in this video. My most recent read I started in July but finished in August, so I will talk about that in August, wrap up a month from now, as opposed to right now. So that's just what's gonna happen. So I read 17 books in the month of July. Out of the 17 books that I read, 2 of them were written by authors of color, and they were both Asian. The rest of them were all white. 11 out of 17 of those books were written by women. 6 of them were written by men, but also there's one book that was co-written by a man and a woman, so more like 12 books written by women and 6 books written by men. And 2 of the authors are trans, one is non-binary, and one is a trans man. So those are my stats for the month. I usually forget to do this because it's hard for me to track stuff. I'm not that organized a lot of ways. I just do Goodreads to keep my reading diary on track, but other than that, it's hard for me to really, I don't know, it doesn't come naturally to me, okay? So yeah, those are the stats if you're interested. Now let's just jump right into my most recent reads from the very end of July to the very beginning of July. So towards the end of July, I read the book A Conspiracy of Truths by Alexandra Rowland. I rated this book 2 stars, and my Goodreads review says snooze fest because that's really what it was. I feel like it kind of was trying to be, what's that one book about? It's like a classic fantasy novel about a guy who's retelling his adventures of the past from just perspective of sitting at the bar. Now he's telling all these listeners about his life. I'm forgetting, it's a really famous fantasy book, but it gave me the vibes of trying to mimic that, even though I never even read that book, and clearly because I don't remember the name of it or the author. Editing Sunny here. The book I'm talking about is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. I have no fucking clue why I could not, for the life of me, remember what the title of the book was, but the main character in that is named Quoth. But it just gave me those vibes in terms of how it was framed and structured, because our main character is this really old man who has been thrown in prison for witchcraft or whatever, and we're seeing him as he we hear him recount to you, the reader, who is supposed to be another character in the book. He's recounting what led up to his experiences and then his experiences themselves. There's also the element of the fact that his job is a chanter or something like that, where he goes around the world, travels and collects people's stories and collects stories to tell them to other people. But in this country or the city that he finds himself in and that he gets arrested in, they don't really value that. So no one really knows what his job is, and they all think he's lying or making shit up when he tries to explain things. But his gift for and his job of storytelling helps him get out of a lot of sticky situations, and he is also trying to navigate being imprisoned and also the different political powers in play and how he can mess around with them so that he can best get out as opposed to be executed, because his advocate or his lawyer is not really that interested in getting him out of prison. She is just trying to maintain her power as long as possible. There are a couple interesting traditions within this fantasy world that are kind of touched on in terms of the way that everyone has multiple spouses, and gender and sexuality in regards to that is not taken that seriously. I thought it was interesting in that way, but not the entire plot of the book was just not gripping enough for me personally. I did not find it to be interesting, mostly because it dragged on for so long. It's such a long book, and I just was not interested in paying attention for that long for a story that really didn't have that much payoff, and I just felt there wasn't that much suspense or sort of I was thinking, oh, I wonder what happens next, but not because I cared about the characters. It was just a sense of like vague curiosity as opposed to investment in what the plot was going to actually be like. So, did not really enjoy this fantasy. I picked it up because I really wanted to read a story within a story type of book, like a book that is about something, but the character in that is also telling stories to us or to, like, throughout. I don't know. I wanted to get something like that, something kind of whimsical, but this was not that. It was pretty gritty. Then the book that I read before that was Animal by Lisa Taddeo. This book I rated 3 stars, and my Goodreads review, also you can find me on Goodreads, link in the description box down below as always. I rated this book 3 stars, and on Goodreads I said that it was brutal, unhinged, and deeply violent, and I stand by those words as my review, because it is incredibly traumatizing, this book. Or we're following a main character who is incredibly traumatized. Both of her parents are dead, and their deaths were quite violent, not that we know anything about the details of it until towards the end, and she deals with a lot of gendered violence, so huge trigger warning for sexual assault and pedophilia, and yeah, it's bad. She goes through her life navigating the trauma of that in the aftermath and in the current realities of experiencing those things, as well as the fact that she has a very interesting relationship to men, love, sex, family, female friendships, and not really having many of those, food, money. Did I say money? Like, she has a very interesting, twisted relationship with all of these things because nothing about her life has really been that normal. And there are so many lines in this book that feel very dry and dismissive and offhand for what they're talking about. And I was describing the plot of this and different elements of this story to some of my friends, and they were just like looking shocked the whole time, being like, whoa, that is wild. And because it is, like, and also, like, even though all of the events and the things that happen and occur within the course of this book are incredibly wild, because she gets involved with a lot of relationships with older men who have power over her, like her boss, and they're always married, and she's always the other woman, and that's, like, just how she lives her life, I guess, and it's because of that's how she copes, like, with life and her trauma. And it's like she is such a character who, like, doesn't give a fuck, mostly because she can't be bothered to at this point. She's already gone through everything there is to suffer, so it's like nothing kind of phases her. The way that this author writes the most gruesome gnats are so annoying. The most gruesome, evil situations in this offhand, sarcastic, dry, removed way. It kind of gave me the vibes of, like, Otessa Moshfegh and that genre of, like, depressed millennial woman type books. But this book, like, takes it to a new level in terms of how atrocious the things that occur to our main character are. It's, like, very melodramatic in a way that is so without any of the drama. Like, there's no drama to it. And the writing, in some elements, I feel like kind of convoluted unnecessarily, but maybe that's just because I'm not interested in writing that feels like that, but it's very particular, and it makes you feel gross and icky. Yeah, the book that I read before Animal was very different, and that is Dial A For Aunties by Jessie Q. Sutanto. This book is a thriller, less of a thriller, it's more of a thriller, less of a mystery, because we know what happened, we're just trying to figure out how to get away with it, because the context of this is that our main character is this, like, 26-year-old woman who is Indonesian and Chinese, and her family is very raucous and wants her to, like, stay in the nest and not, fly away the way that all of the other sons of the aunts have left. And so she feels this, like, obligation to stay with her family in California and work at their wedding business together, because basically all of the aunts like, one of them, like, sings, one of them does makeup, one of them does flowers, and our main character is a wedding photographer. And if you didn't know this, I'm a photographer as well. I don't really shoot weddings. I've assistant shot weddings before, but, like, it's very wild, and that's not, I don't know, I'm more of just, like, a portrait photographer, but I've been doing that for, like, 4 or 5 years, so reading from the perspective of someone who, like, majored in photography. Well, I don't know if she did. I forgot, but like who studied it and then like does it professionally throughout the book was so fun for me. And also I'm Chinese, so reading from the perspective of a Chinese character, because she's ethnically Chinese, but her family like history, they moved to Indonesia at some point within her family history, so they speak like, so they're Indo-Chinese, right? And I thought that like I don't really like the word representation. I feel like it's used in all these ways that feels kind of gross and like but like I thought it was solid representation, honestly. And the way that our main character interacts with her mother and her aunts and Chinese and Indonesian culture are reflected in the way they interact, and how frustrated our main character gets at certain points with her family was so, like, I don't know, it was so fun for me to see. And also, okay, wait, let me get into the plot of the story. Basically, our main character accidentally murders her date, and the reason why she was even on this date is because her mother created a dating app, like, profile on her daughter's behalf, and she got catfished, and was a catfish. It was like a dual catfish, sets them up on this date, she goes on the date, he's being creepy towards her, they're in the car, she, like, pepper sprays him, and then he, like, dies. And so then she's like, fuck, what do? She goes home, she calls her mom and her aunts, and she's like, guys, like, I accidentally killed a guy, what the fuck am I supposed to do? The aunts and the mom, instead of being like, oh no, you're a murderer, the way that our main character expects and is afraid to be confronted with, they just kind of immediately, it's casual, and they immediately start helping her. And that, like, sense of family and community and togetherness was, like, it was so lovely to see. The other, like, wild element of the story is that our main character goes on the date, like, the night before she's supposed to work a wedding, and her whole family, you know, her wedding family business is supposed to work this really huge wedding for a really famous guy, like a really rich guy, the son of some, you know, billionaire CEO type shit. It's like a whole scenario. And so the next day, they're, like, basically trying to figure out how to get rid of this body while working a wedding, and trying to not get found out, and trying to not get and it's very fun and wild, and I was laughing out loud at many points in the story, because it was just so, not only, like, humorous in how it was written and the way that the dialogue is delivered, but the comedic timing, I think, is really perfect at points, and I think that the ridiculousness of the situations is fun. And there's also a romance that goes on throughout the entirety of this book, where our main character kind of, she has, like, flashbacks to her relationship with her college, like, sweetheart boyfriend dude, and she really loved him, but she left him because of family stuff or whatever, but then he ends up being the one who's owning the hotel that this huge wedding is happening at, so it's like, whoa. So our main character kind of has a reunion with her ex, and it's a whole situation. So that's that book. I thought it was so fun, and I rated it 4 stars. It made me giggle, it gave me the feels, I was very excited. I love a funny thriller. If you have any other funny thriller recommendations, like, okay, I think in my review, on Goodreads, I also mentioned that it reminded me of, like, Finley Donovan is Killing It by Ellie Cosimano and Crazy Rich Asians by Kevin Kwan. Like, combine those books and I feel like you get this, because there's you know, the huge Asian wedding with, like, really rich people and, like, the romance element, but then there's also the really fun accidental involvement in murder and trying to get away with it, and, like, the fun kind of quirky tone of it, and also dealing with, like, family and friends and community. So yeah, I thought it was a good book. I liked it a lot more than I expected to as well. The book that I read before that was Artificial Condition, which is the second book in the Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. I rated this book 3 stars. I think this whole series of novellas about Murderbot are all, like, it just gives me a 3-star series, and I'm interested in seeing how the rest of it plays out, but each of the books don't, like, blow me away in any spectacular or particular way, and that's fine. It's like, you know, that's not what I'm there for. This book, we follow the aftermath of the first book's events, and Murderbot he's just there to, well, I don't even think it's a he, it's a bot, so it's like, yes, it's just an it, I guess. But also, I listened to this book on audio, and the voice actor for it, I'm pretty sure, is, like, a man, so I just gendered the murder bot in my head that way. Anyway, so it's a sci-fi novella set in space. This bot called a murder bot that just like is hired out to different agencies and groups of people to protect and murder people. And this bot has hacked its government like module and is using it solely for the purpose of watching like human media. Like this bot fucking loves human media and watching human media. It's all it does in all its free time. It's just like a fun robot sci-fi novella series. Yeah. Not much to say about it. I rated it 3 stars. The book that I read before that was The Box in the Woods by Maureen Johnson. This is the 4th book in the Truly Devious series, which is a YA mystery series following our main character, Stevie, I believe, who is a wannabe detective investigator. And she's like a Sherlock Holmes type character. She only cares about solving mysteries and like true crime. Like that's the only thing she cares about. And she's unfamiliar with every other aspect of trying to deal with life. And so we're following her in this 4th book when she gets hired by this like rich camp guy to try to solve the mystery of what happened at the summer camp in the 70s. There was this occurrence of a murder in the woods, and it's just been a cold case and unsolved for years. So Stevie gets recruited to like work as a camp counselor at this summer camp, but really what she's doing there is trying to solve the murder and trying to solve the mystery of the murder of these 4 teenagers. And I think this book was pretty masterful in the way that it uncovered the mystery and told a narrative through a different narrative about a different narrative in this layered way that kind of shone a light on the ways that towns create mythology about themselves and people with power are able to maintain their power through maintaining that mythology. If you read the book, I think you know what I'm talking about, what I'm getting at, but also I definitely guessed the killer, or at least like who the whodunit part of the book within the first like chapter. Like honestly, as soon as we met that character, I was like, yeah, that's gonna be the killer. You're just a little bit too innocuous and otherwise would not be necessary in the book if you were not the killer. So I mean, that's not the book's fault though, that's just how YA mysteries go, I kind of think. This is definitely the best book in the Truly Devious series. I thought that the other ones, the 3 books before this one, were like meh, like 3 stars reads, but this was like a 3.5 4-star read for me, because I thought that even though it kind of dragged for the first maybe 60-70% of the book, by the end I was so invested in what was going on and I was like tense sitting on the bus listening to it, like what's gonna happen next? Oh no, she jumped into the fucking, it's a time. And I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. The next book I want to talk about is Vision by Julia Grofser, and this is a very weird, very short graphic novel about a Victorian lady who has a talking mirror that basically she has sex with. It's very morbid as well, and the art style is intricate as hell and beautiful, and I thought this was just weird, dark, and gross. I liked it. I rated it 3 stars. Oh, and my Goodreads review says, Victorian fever dream, freaky and visceral. And I think that was a pretty good summation of what it kind of was. And the book that I read before that was Stone Fruit by Lee Lai. I talked about this in my most recent video, my Taylor Swift songs as books video, and this is written by a non-binary Asian author, and that's cool because that's me too. And well, I'm not an author, but you know, maybe one day. But Stone Fruit is about a lesbian couple and their really complicated relationship dynamics and the family dynamics of both of them, because one of them comes from a very Christian conservative family and she's trans, and she hasn't been in contact with her family in a while, and the other one is a Chinese girl who we don't really see her interact with her parents, but she has a sister who has a child, and the lesbian couple take care of this child a couple times a week. And there's a really tense relationship with everyone's family with each other, and I thought it was such a beautiful depiction of queerness and also the ferocity of childhood and the way that families operate and how queer found family works, and also how family itself in its blood functions. And it's about love and abandonment and grief and how we grieve the loss of relationships that are deeply meaningful to us, and also how we repair ourselves, and mental illness and the way that it impacts our relationships with each other. It was just such a beautiful graphic novel that was stunningly illustrated. It was good. I rated it 4 stars. The book that I read before that was Disenchanted by Robert Creasy, or Croze. I rated this book like 3 stars because it was like a fantasy satire. The description of it compared it to like The Princess Bride, which not on that level, but like it kind of gave those vibes. It's about this king, or this guy who was a king, but then he gets slaughtered in like a war or something, and he becomes this wraith, which is like basically like a zombie type creature. And this wraith creature now has to go on this quest to get rid of this sword that is like stuck to his hand, because he like made a deal before he was a king that he would like take this sword, but he didn't realize part of the sword contract was that he had to hold it for the rest of forever, like not for the rest of his life, like forever. So even after he died, he doesn't want to be a wraith, because wraiths are like feared, the way that paranormal creepy creatures are. Throughout the course of this book, he has to cope with the way that his macho energy and type of shit, and the way that he as a king was kind of not good as a person, and how that plays out and the consequences of it in his afterlife, which I thought was pretty satisfying and also just fun. It was a fun book, but I wasn't that interested or invested the whole time. And also it's like about a man written by a man, and I don't know, I just don't really care about that, because I feel like a lot of fairy tales and fantasy stories are already centered around that, and I just don't really care that much. So I rated it 3 stars. The next book that I read... Hi, Editing Sunny back here again to let you know that I forgot to include one of the books in this video. Awesome, okay. And that book is The Mary Spinster by Daniel Ortberg. This book is a short story collection of fairy tale retellings that are kind of darker, and to be honest, none of these particularly stood out to me. They're not very memorable. In fact, they're so not memorable that I forgot to include this short story collection altogether in this video. So that should tell you something, I guess. I thought it was fine. I think I rated it 3 stars, but yeah, nothing too impressive or anything to write home about, so... Or the book I read before that was a reread, and I very rarely reread books, but I just had a deep craving to reread this one because it was a 5-star read. One of my favorites of last year, and that is The Hike by Drew Magary. I love this book. It's wild. It's like a bad acid trip, but very existential. And that's all I'm going to say about that, because if you've watched my other videos or like my favorite books of 2020, I talked about this extensively, and it's a 5-star book. Again, very good to read or listen to high. The next book, or the book I read before that, was Barney and Roses, which I also mentioned in my Taylor Swift video. Barney and Roses is by T. Kingfisher, and it's a solid fantasy Beauty and the Beast retelling that really integrates plants and magic into it, and also family and love in this way that was pretty well written. Not really evident of the sort of weird Stockholm syndrome-y shit that a lot of beauty or like abuser type stuff, like love storylines that a lot of Beauty and the Beast like retellings, love stories kind of do, and it did an interesting thing with like magic, I think. So yeah, I rated it 4 stars. The book that I read right after that, sorry, I didn't mention this. The book I read right after that T. Kingfisher book was another T. Kingfisher book. It's a very short one called Origin, and it's just like a short story. I listened to it, and I thought it was fine. I rated it 3 stars. It's a short story, It's horror, not something to write home about. The book that I read before that was an S.T. Gibson book called A Dowry of Blood. Wow, I feel like I read this book so long ago. Okay, A Dowry of Blood is about these vampires, and they're bisexual. That's all. No, I'm kidding. So basically, there's this Dracula type guy who seduces this young girl in like 18th century France or whatever after a massacre of her whole village and family, and he takes her under his wing or whatever. Basically, like, grooms her, because he's, like a 1,000-year-old vampire. Turns her into a vampire. She gets into this really abusive relationship with him. Throughout this book, we follow them as another person joins in on their relationship, so it's like a throuple, and then another person joins in another relationship, and it's like 4 people in this relationship, but it's all dominated by this Dracula-type figure who's an abusive piece of shit. So from the very beginning of this book, we know that the Dracula type guy, I'm forgetting his fucking name, the abuser, he is dead, and the entire book is written from the perspective of the first girl that, you know, he takes in, the French girl. It's kind of like written to him. So it's like, we killed you, we're sorry, I'm sorry, but here's my side of the story. And it's kind of framed in that way, so it leads up to the actual event, and we see all the things that lead up to it, and it was infuriating, and it's about abuse and power. It's all about power and the way that like magic and immortality can impact it, and I rated it 3.5 stars, 4 stars. I thought it was really solid and gothic and gross and immersive. Kind of gave me the vibes of Yellow Jessamine by Caitlin Starling, which I really love that one, but that book is completely like sapphic, and this book, like I said, it has to do with the relationship of a man with a woman, and then another woman, and then those women form a relationship, and then there's another man, and they form a relationship, you know. It also deals with a lot of like mental health things and the aftermath, and also the coping with living in an abusive relationship, so major trigger warnings for that. The book that I read before that was the original by Brandon Sanderson and Mary K. Robinette, and this book was fascinating. It's about this woman who wakes up as a clone of herself, and she's told by the government that herself, like her true self, murdered her husband, and now her cloned self needs to go either prove her, like, in order to be presented to the court of law in this sci-fi future reality, she needs to, in her cloned body, in her cloned self, in which the government has given her a lot of like attributes of being able to fight like an assassin and a killer, even though she was not that in her real life, she needs to go out and prove either her original self's innocence and figure out who did it, or figure out why she did it. And she has like a limited time to be able to do this, and so she's like sent on this mission. And in this world, a lot of people's realities are constructed in their own minds because of the way technology works. Everyone's like microchipped, but people do it of their own will and because it makes life better for them, and the people who don't choose to do it are seen as like the weirdos and the outsiders. But once you have that chip within you, your perception of the world is catered to you. So when you walk down the street in the city, you're seeing like these buildings that are really beautiful according to your taste. When you walk outside and you go to the market, you see a market that is bustling and beautiful in the way that you know it to be. And so now as a clone, our main character no longer has those, like, that wall of perception, and she sees things for how they are, and how all these buildings are white and empty and crumbling, and the bustling marketplace that she saw was not that. It was just like a random stall, like, and it was fascinating, and it was so fast-paced, and our main character is morally gray because she's trying to figure out why herself would have ever killed her husband. And there's also the issue of like cloning, and then the government control and technology and the ways that those things interact. And our main character is an artist, and she like carved into orange peels, and the way that her husband was murdered was carved with the same design of like that she would use to carve orange peels with, and she's like shocked at that, right? And her husband is a technology sort of research professor type guy who does a lot of work on creating the technology that makes this world and the cloning and whatever available. And this book was so dramatic and gripping and phenomenal. Just such a good listen. I think it's only available in audio format. I think I listened to it either on like Scribd or Hoopla, but phenomenal. I blew my mind. I rated it 4 stars. It's more of like a 4.5, 5-star, honestly, but I just kept thinking, like, after I finished reading it, I was like, that was pretty good, 4 stars, but now it's still, like, ruminating in my head, and, like, I don't know, it just really impacted me. The book that I read before that was Survive the Night by Riley Sager. Everyone read this book in July, because it was a July release, and I thought it was good. I rated it 4 stars. I think that the framing device, very interesting, very fun, and the ending made everything clear, I think. And I thought all the twists were pretty smart and interesting and unexpected. I thought it kind of dragged towards the beginning, like maybe the first 50%. And it was a very interesting exploration of grief and trauma and mental illness and victim blaming, which I think a lot of reviews of this book are reflective of that, in terms of the way that people don't really believe in the portrayal of our main character's mental illness and her like psychosis and the way that she disassociates, and also blames her for the things that happened to her, like, oh, why are you being so stupid, you should have gotten out of the car, why did you trust him, or why did you, when it's like, that's victim blaming. And also I was just watching Haley Hughes wrap up. She also read 17 books last month, which was interesting. And she read Survive the Night, and she was talking about this. And she's a therapist, so she was talking about sort of the way that the trauma responses as portrayed in this book are actually, pretty correct. That when I was reading this book, I wasn't thinking about how that wasn't realistic. I was thinking about how it was an interesting usage of perception and like what is reality and what is not, and how that can be manipulated, how vulnerable people, and particularly women, are victims of violence in that way and blamed for the violence that occurs to them, because our main character is feeling a lot of guilt over the fact that her best friend was murdered. That's Survive the Night, rated at 4 stars. Thought it was pretty good. The second to first book, so the second book I read in the month of July was Her Name in the Sky by Kelly Quindlen, and this book, 5 stars. That religious guilt, that sapphic love story hits different. Same with She Drives Me Crazy, which is the first book I read, and I rated that book 5 stars as well, although it's probably more of a 4 star now in hindsight. But I talked about Her Name in the Sky a lot in my religious trauma queerness sort of book video, which I'll link up above. I talk about it there, but it's like a best friendship to lovers, but it has a hidden romance or like a denial of feelings because of homophobia. Kelly Quindlen deserves the hype that Becky Albertalli has. I'm just gonna say it. Anyway, She Drives Me Crazy, really solid enemies to lovers, forced proximity, fake dating story. It made me cry. All of Kelly Quindlen books makes me cry, and I've read them all at this point. It's just my sapphic contemporary young adult kick, I guess. Like, I don't know. I think the writing style of her books, because it's YA contemporary, it's pretty particular to that genre, and it falls into some of the tropes that the genre of books tends to. But the writing there's a lot of times I just don't really find it that impressive, but there are some moments where I'm like, wow, these characters I feel so much for them, and I relate to them so much, and they just hit me on an emotional level that I just didn't know was accessible to me anymore in young adult books. So yeah, major kudos and applaud to Kelly Quindlen. I don't think she can write a book that is below 4 stars for me personally. So definitely new favorite author, I suppose. Although I don't physically own any of her books, so. But yeah, so those are all 17 of the books that I read in the month of July. Some graphic novels, lots of some thrillers, some sci-fi, some contemporary YA, sapphic books. Yeah, some fantasy. A typical sunny wrap up. So yeah, if you like this video, like, comment, subscribe, whatever. And thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments if there are any specific books on this wrap up that you haven't read and you would like to check out, or that you have read, and your thoughts on those. That's all I have for you today, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.